The term overpowered, for the most part, at least on the internet, holds a very negative connotation. It means a character that was poorly written and therefore too powerful for his narrative to retain its credibility. From this video's title, you obviously understand that that's not what I'm referring to when I say overpowered. I'm just discussing a character whose power is in a complete other league from those around him. And while for the most part you end up with a character that's, quite frankly, usually stupid in their setting, not calling anyone out specifically, but you all know who I'm talking about. There are a few overpowered characters done right, and that's mainly what I'd like this little series I'm working on to focus on. I wanted to do this for a while, either in the format of a top 10 list or otherwise, and I decided this would be my best bet, especially because I get to talk about Meruem from Hunter x Hunter 2011, and fuck you spellcheck for changing it to Maryland every single time I wrote his name. Meruem is a character I love, and who power-wise is head and shoulders above everyone else introduced in the series thus far. I also believe, aside from him being overpowered, I personally think he's one of the greatest antagonists of all time. Yes, he's an even better anime antagonist than Jake Paul, and even better than Asian Jake Paul, and that's not a compliment I give out lightly. The Chimera Ant arc was a slow-moving piece of story, and yet was one of the most masterful pieces of art I've laid eyes on as an anime fan. It was over 60 episodes long and enthralled me the whole way through, with the climax basically moving at slow motion with a slightly annoying narrator explaining what's going on, but quite frankly, you need that narrator to explain what's going on because 20 episodes went over 2 minutes of in-series narrative. But this is not the time to fanboy over the Hunter x Hunter Chimera Ant arc. It's time to talk about the king. As far as overpowered characters go, there are 2 criteria that they need to possess or else they crumble at their core. Firstly, the baseline. Their power level needs to make sense, and it has to be dealt with appropriately throughout the story. That means they can't be as inexplicably powerful as Kefla. I mean, seriously, what were they thinking? And their power can't get inexplicably nerfed halfway through their story. Every character that we meet for the second time in Fairy Tail. And secondly, obviously, they need to serve their purpose in the narrative appropriately. And Meruem, of course, being that he's on this list, nails these 2 properties flawlessly. As far as the first one, he's perfectly credible, as I will explain, and as far as the second one, he goes and exceeds all expectations anyone could have in regards to the nature of the Ant King. To justify this first point, the Chimera Ant is a terrifying species that every generation slowly but surely evolves into a greater predator, because everything that the queen ingests is used as the power source for the next generation of ants, making those ants a more dominant species than whatever was ingested to birth them. To cut to the chase, their threat is incredibly magnified due to not only mere humans eaten by the queen, but humans with Nen, essentially making these chimera ants naturally higher on the food chain than humanity. So to express why he's rightfully overpowered, your average hunter would lose to a chimera ant even without Nen. If said insect had Nen, it would be able to take down upper tier hunters relatively easily. If it's a chimera ant captain, it will go toe-to-toe with the hand-picked elite hunters for the job, and for the most part be more powerful. And once you understand their makeup up to this point of the game, please allow me to elucidate what Kite symbolizes in this story's narrative, since I assume everyone that's watching this video knows full well who Kite is, what his role is in the story, and will not get spoiled by what I'm about to tell you. To briefly summarize, he is a 2-fold climax character, which is not supposed to die in vain by any story's standards. He's the link to Gon's father, which took an insanely long time and insane amount of effort throughout the series to get to the point to actualize him as a character. Not to mention, he's the complete climax of the Greed Island arc, which winds down to, after much trials and tribulations within the confines of Greed Island, the eventual result of that multi-episode endeavor, climaxed in the surprise meeting with Kite, Gon's godfather. And the second level of the climax is that they found themselves an insanely skilled hunter to educate them and guide them through the paths of hell through the Chimera Ant arc. Up to this point, basically every arc since the Hunter exam arc that focused on Gon and Killua, they had some sort of mentor to guide them through it, whether it was Wing, Bisky, or at this point it seems to be Kite. He's not supposed to die. In fact, he's revealed to be ridiculously powerful, being able to take down 2 Nenless Chimera Ant captains 1 hit each. Yet, when he faces Pito, a member of the Royal Guard, saying that it was a one-sided massacre, would tone down immensely the result of this battle on a physical and emotional level. Kite was swatted easier by Pito than if Usopp would incur the wrath of One Punch Man. It was a result no one saw coming, and an ultimate introduction to the power gap between a captain and a royal guard, where it's more than unclear if any hunter alive would stand a ghost of a chance against one of these guards. The power gap between Pito and her king, Meruem, is on a much, much larger scale than anything I've mentioned. So as far as the reasoning behind how his power level was appropriately apportioned to him, I think it's safe to say that it was done pretty awesomely. And because he's another species, there's no reason to confine him to the limits of humanity. The same reason why comparing Luffy, a badass rubber pirate dude, to Goku, a different badass alien dude from a different universe, would be completely laughable, and sensibly so. So the setup was great, and the next issue for OP characters is nerfing them. Did Meruem get nerfed? Did his power level waver depending on how the plot desired? Absolutely not. Whether it was his own subordinates or those who opposed him, he was ruthless and unfazable. There was less friction between him and his opponents than if I'd have to face off one-on-one against a small legion of titans. And in case you need elaboration of that metaphor, I wouldn't have been doing too hot. I mean, having the power of God and anime on my side is like, it's great and all, but yeah, memes versus titans, I think the titans would have a slight edge. Aside from all this, Meruem was still constantly growing and evolving at an alarming rate on his own right. On one side, from experience, and on the other hand, every creature he'd devour, he would obtain their abilities, human or ant. And he's gotten into many of these fights. Well, fights is not really a great word. Squabbles? Squabbles isn't a good word either. Massacres implies there was some form of resistance. In fact, speaking of fights, I'd say he was only really involved in one fight in the entire series, and that was against the Chancellor of the Hunters and professional Japanese old man extraordinaire, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Netero. To understand his opposition slightly, Netero's a freaking boss, okay? Aside from light speed punches, and despite being depicted as one of the top 5 greatest Nen users alive, Nen users, sounds like a junkie. Hi, I'm Netero. I've been using for the last, 150 years. Anyway, as I've mentioned, Japanese old man extraordinaire. I don't know what it is about Asians, but they really respect their elders. Every Japanese old man in anime is gonna be some form of badass, and that's a fact. I don't need to bring examples of it because it would be easier and way more efficient to bring examples of Japanese old men, in shonens especially, that aren't badass. Even this season, there's an anime that's literally a badass old man documentary, Inuyashiki. The daily life of a badass cyborg Deadpool grandpa. Ooh, in 3D. And even though this battle is one of the greatest anime fight scenes of all time, and that's like an undisputed fact, I don't think it's clear enough at how one-sided this was either. Part of why I like this battle is because before the battle even began, before they went to their battlefield, Netero knew he was probably going to his grave from this one scene alone. Despite that, he knew what he had to do, and then ended up forcing the king into a position where the king could not kill him if he wanted the information Geezer-sama possessed. Despite the clearly advantageous outset of the fight, and despite all of Geezer-chan's might, nothing he could do could phase the king. The best he did was surprise him that there was a being that had this much power, not that it was a comparison by any means. So the point I'm trying to make with all this is Meruem accomplished the obligatory first requirement as far as overpowered characters go, better than any non-comedy character I've ever seen. Even as far as the frightening reality that caused his demise actually made sense, and if this first aspect of being OP isn't met, the credibility for the entire character falls into question and truly ultimately crumbles. Once the continuity exists, reasonably however, only then can we work on the actual character writing and what the creator did with his awesome, believable character. Before I move on to how Meruem's second aspect is what actually makes him one of the, if not the greatest anime antagonist of all time, I'd like to make a disclaimer that for all One Punch Man fans, I think One Punch Man is the second best depiction of an anime overpowered character, just below Meruem. That has nothing to do with a flawed first aspect or a lack of credibility, because quite frankly, he's a comedy character, and that gives him passes on credibility if he aces the humor, which he kinda does, so I'll save One Punch Man for a future episode of this series, delving into overpowered anime characters done right or done abysmally wrong. Back to Meruem. When an OP character, especially an antagonist, is brought into the series and balanced carefully, his purpose is, for the most part, to be viewed as an insurmountable foe that takes everything the protagonist has, whether it's the power of friendship, the power of teamwork, some crazy strategy, delving into his past tormenting emotions to push himself to a level forward, which is probably the most common of these, as far as how to end a shonen arc or story, or the all-too-common phrase from his allies in the crowd basically saying, "Oh my god, the protagonist pushed himself to a level even further beyond and achieved the impossible. No one's ever done that before. I can't believe I'm seeing it with my own eyes. He became, no, this is not sexist. It's just the fact that shonen girls never accomplish anything major. He became an Ultra Instinct Super Saiyan God Blue Red Magenta Hybrid Gradient with pink eyeliner 17. And that's usually the cue for the bad guy to repeat that entire phrase and then shout, "Impossible!" in total disbelief. The issues with doing any of the aforementioned possibilities are, firstly, from the perspective of the protagonist, it's hard to have the story progress from that point in a credible fashion. now that he allegedly defeated the most powerful bad guy ever. In the next arc, he will need some sort of challenge to have the series move on, and then it gets into issues as far as credibility, which is a slight issue with Bleach and Dragon Ball, and quite frankly, one of the major obstacles for the Boruto series to have any hope of success, with Naruto essentially rising to the occasion and defeating the most OP creature of all time. And a similar issue remains with Fairy Tail, where it's essentially Natsu eating some sort of gold godfire ether nano plot cake to get a temporary power-up and defeat the OP villain, giving us the obligatory protagonist beats the main bad guy trope, but because of plot garbage, the protagonist didn't even need to evolve whatsoever for the next arc, bringing us back to status quo. And secondly, it humiliates the villain, completely dismissing any ideals or development on his part of the equation. Try to think of one OP villain that actually pulled off being a great antagonist as well. You may find Meruem to be the only one in that category, and since Togashi realized this, he crafted Meruem's tale into far more than the battle shown in visual appeal, where he gets his ass whooped at the end by the main character who gets some crazy power boost. The main character did get said power boost, but not for the shonen hype that everyone else seems to be looking for. Togashi crafted around Meruem a story of emotional and metaphoric value, being the tale of an all-powerful monster as he ascends through carefully timed development to a level of humanity, and how in perfect contrast it depicts Gon, a flawed human that descends with rational pacing to become an all-powerful monster. The other details and brilliant point in his writing, however, will have to be saved for my video where I discuss the greatest villains in anime, as opposed to overpowered characters done right. But I think my point was made clear when I say Meruem is an overpowered character done right. And I think it's a lesson that many other anime need to learn from, because if you have an overpowered antagonist, you can't just make him beaten by the shonen protagonist at the end of the arc because of some ass pull power-up, whatever. The entire series crumbles from that point on if that happens. If you want it to be the climax ending of a story, that's nice, but it's not more than an average ending to a story. Meruem pushed the envelope's bounds, creating an emotional and metaphorically appealing narrative more than just a visual one. And yeah, we still got our visual treats with the Gon versus Pito fight, which also contained so much more than just Shonen Runt becomes strong, beats bad guy, everyone loves him now. Oh, it contains so much more than merely that. For a first episode of a new series, I'm pretty happy with how this one came out, and I have a script ready for the second one, which in all honesty, I think is actually way better. So if you'd like to like and subscribe to know when that comes out, I would be greatly appreciative. Also, let me know how I can improve this series in the comments, because like every new series, I need both practice and critique, so help me out, please. Speaking of helping me out, huge thanks to the Anime Zone for editing this video. Link to his channel in the description. He does some really funny Dragon Ball dubs and AMVs and whatever, and quite frankly, I would really appreciate it if you just checked out one of his videos and sent him my regards. If any of you want to edit any of my videos, feel free to send me an email, nuxtaco@gmail.com. I'm also around on Twitter, link in the description, and I love every single one of you. Have yourself a most wonderful evening, and I'll see you next time.